Welcome to That 70s class, Teaching Energy During Canada's Energy Crisis. I'm Alan MacEachern, and I'm going to be presenting with Rosemary Giles. We're both from Western University. In 1971, Queen's University chemical engineering professor Reginald Clark introduced a new interdisciplinary environmental studies course called Nature, Science, and Man. It ran for the rest of the decade. Clark gave some of the lectures himself, but he also increasingly brought in speakers from across the university, across Canada, and around the world. Stephen Lewis on international development, Tommy Douglas and Flora MacDonald on energy policy, Buckminster Fuller on geodesic domes, and lots more. Those films ended up in Queen's University archives, and a few years ago, the archives put out a call for someone to use them and to make them better known. I answered that call, had a few of them digitized, with plans to research them. In the meantime, the archives went ahead and digitized 108 of them and put them online on the Queen's University Library's YouTube channel. Let me give you a clip to show you what we're talking about. Here's NDPer Tommy Douglas and Liberal Paul McRae, as well as Flora MacDonald, in an energy policy symposium in 1974.
The main political parties are in tremendous agreement with
of the people of Alberta, for instance, or Saskatchewan, is why is oil just a natural resource? What about the timber from British Columbia? What about the nickel and the iron ore, the nickel from Ontario and the iron ore from Quebec?
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that's...
But what the Westerner says is that whenever we want to buy something from somebody else, the market price prevails. But when we've got something somebody wants, then suddenly it becomes a national resource and there ought to be a special price. And that's what this conference was all about. It's you remember Josh Billings' old statement. He said, when a fella says, it ain't the money, it's the principle of the thing, it's the money.
As you can tell, the videos are not very good quality. Most are not good video, some are not even very good audio, and often they don't capture what the speaker is showing on a slide projector, overhead projector, or blackboard. Nor do they always pick up the questions in the question and answers.
But they are valuable and interesting nonetheless. Above all, they offer a window into what Canadian thinkers, mostly white, middle-aged, central Canadian male academics, industry representatives, bureaucrats, and politicians, were thinking about a whole range of environmental and social issues in the mid-1970s. What's more, the lectures are directed to students, so the speakers are relatively straightforward in their delivery. The speakers also tend to provide more off-the-record and off-the-cuff statements than they might to the press or in a publication. And finally, and this is a real bonus, because Queen's University Archive put all 108 videos on YouTube, that means that we and other researchers have access to the transcripts that YouTube automatically creates. Once we had the transcripts, Alan and I decided to set aside the videos and focus on the transcripts themselves due to the quality of the videos and the audio. To analyze them, I used NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis software. NVivo allowed me to upload all the transcripts and analyze them independently and simultaneously. I then ran a query for the 100 most common words found within all of the transcripts. The results yielded nouns such as energy, oil, gas, future, and growth, which we used to guide the rest of the transcript's coding. I then went through each transcript, located the theme words, and created blocks of text that fleshed out how the concept was being used. The result was a master document which contained all the references for each theme and gave us a better understanding of the overall views and the many contradicting views on each topic. It also helped us locate key lectures on any given topic, sometimes ones that we may not have expected, given the title or the speaker, as well as interesting throwaway lines from people speaking on some other topic.
We can imagine exploring these 108 lectures in any number of ways down the road, looking at federalism or international development or pollution or what have you. But it was clear that energy and the future of energy was going to be our initial focus for two related reasons. First, energy was a dominant topic in the Nature, Science, and Man course. As Rose mentioned, it yielded, as this word cloud shows, some of the most common words, which didn't surprise us. About 26 of the videos, a full 1/4 of the total, deal with energy policy, oil and gas, coal, hydro, solar, nuclear power, or some mix of these. Energy was one of the prime environmental interests of Professor Reg Clark, and one of the principal reasons he designed the course in the first place. And second, when these lectures were given, when these videos were made, Canada and the world were immersed in the energy crisis that had begun in late 1973. So energy was top of mind for many of the speakers. And it's worth our understanding how scientists, academics, politicians, and bureaucrats understood the energy situation of the day and what they thought Canada and the world should do. So for the few minutes that we have today, we'd like to introduce some of what we learned from this 70s class with respect to energy and the future of energy.
In October 1973, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, announced an oil embargo against a number of Western countries, which included Canada. There were shortages in the US in particular, and the price of oil jumped from $3 US a barrel to $12 a barrel over the winter. This was the oil crisis. But maybe the key realization that we've had while going through these lectures was how little the speakers were worried about the contemporary oil crisis per se. Rather, they were focused on what it meant in terms of Canada's energy vulnerability. Canada was #1 in the world in per capita use of energy, and its climate and geography would make this difficult to change. And, unrelated to OPEC, Canada was coming to realize it had far less conventional oil reserves than it had previously supposed. The Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, politicians, the oil industry, all had been overly optimistic in the early 1970s as to how much oil Canada had. Optimistic in terms of proven reserves, optimistic in terms of potential reserves, from exploration in the far north and in the waters off the coast of Newfoundland. In 1971, Energy, Mines and Resources Minister Joe Green had stated that Canada had 923 years of oil supply left at present levels of consumption. Just 3 years later, in 1974, the ministry downgraded that to just 9 years. As geologist Kenneth North said in a 1974 lecture on Canadian oil and gas supplies, quote, "Canada's capacity to rely upon domestic oil supplies beyond 1982 will be at an end forever," end quote. There was a surprising degree of agreement amongst the nature, science, and man speakers as to how Canada and the world's energy situation was. By 1985, less than 10 years away, Canada's conventional oil reserves would be gone. Before that happened, Canada would first stop exporting oil, according to Gordon Haight, who was the Vice President of Production for Imperial Oil. For a few more years, Canada would be able to supply itself, but when that ran out, Canada would have to rely solely on imported oil. By 1985, its annual energy deficit would be in the billions of dollars. Laurette Higgins of Ontario Hydro told the Queen students that electricity generating capacity would be down, resulting in 30 times greater chances of rolling blackouts. Now, this was all within the next 10 years. Speaker after speaker saw this general trend happening worldwide. As one of them said, quote, "The age of oil is nearly over," end. So what was Canada to do? Speakers talked a lot about the alternatives to oil and gas. It was commonly accepted amongst many of the speakers that more coal would have to be used, although this came with a lot of problems, such as transportation costs and environmental impact of this coal use. It was also broadly accepted that we would have to rely on nuclear power. Physicist Bennett Lewis confidently declared that nuclear would be supplying the world's energy needs for thousands of years. But even geologist Kenneth North, even solar energy specialist Tony Caffell thought we had no choice but to go nuclear. A number of speakers did discuss what Monsieur Leclerc called the exotics. This was solar, wind, and tidal power. But few of the speakers actually took renewable energy sources seriously. It was very strange, for example, to hear Ralph Overend of Energy, Mines, and Resources give a talk called Alternative Sources, the Role of Coal and Solar Energy. And he concluded that there were a lot of problems with coal, but that since Canada had centuries worth of it, we may as well gear up to use it, and then say nothing of the same sort about solar energy. That left just one other major energy source for Canada, the tar sands of Northern Alberta. For example, in the 1974 Energy Policy Symposium that we just showed a clip of, Conservative MP Flora MacDonald, NDP MP Tommy Douglas, and Liberal MP and member of the Energy Standing Committee, Paul McRae, all agreed. We have to begin developing the tar sands immediately. It's weird to hear Tommy Douglas cheering on the tar sands, but as McRae said, they seem, quote, to be the one thing that we have, end quote. Developing the tar sands would be tremendously daunting. Speakers predicted that it would require all of the engineers in North America, all of Canada's earth-moving equipment, all its steel, and all its cement. It would transform society. There were estimates that 500,000 to 1 million Canadians would move there for work. But all of this development was necessary, not only to extract the 25 billion barrels of oil that existing technology was capable of extracting, but to figure out how to get it at the estimated 1 trillion barrels that the tar sands contained. And this would take time. This was the general worry of many of those who spoke in this class. Tommy Douglas called this the time gap. The fear or the reality was that no matter what direction Canada took to avoid the impending collapse of oil, in fewer than 10 years, the massive shifts were required, and those shifts would take at least 10 years to get off the ground. The only way to avoid what Kenneth North called, quote, not 10, but 25 years of extreme privation, end quote, was to start immediately.
Of course, historians are great at predicting the past, and we know that the Canadian and global energy collapse never arrived in 1985 or since. The age of oil is not yet over. In fact, Canadians as a whole didn't get all that worked up about the energy crisis. It was barely a crisis to them at all. But maybe some of the political and economic decisions that came out of that period, the commitment to develop the tar sands, to build pipelines, were filtering through people such as those who spoke at Queen's Nature, Science, and Man class. And maybe the speakers' alarm about energy, their belief that we have just 10 years to solve the problem, maybe that reminds you of something, and reminds you of a certain crisis that we're facing today, the climate crisis. One of the most noticeable things about the 108 Nature, Science, and Man lectures is how few mention climate, let alone climate change. Only 3 even mention that burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide, which can raise the temperature, and that was widely known at the time. And just one of the 108 is directly on climate. Queen's physicist G.W. Brandy spoke in 1977 on Climate, the New Uncertainty. And only in the final minutes did he discuss whether humans are affecting climate. His conclusion? It's uncertain. No one can say for sure, he states, but it's a matter of real concern. At the moment, we're performing an experiment that could have drastic consequences, and an experiment which certainly we cannot alter if things start to go bad. To conclude, the Nature, Science, and Man class offered 1970s Queen's students an understanding of their environmental situation and a glimpse at their future, even if it didn't always get their future right. Almost 50 years later, the collection of films accessible through Queen's University Archives and Library offer us a glimpse of that past. And Rose and I are trying to get that past right. So we'd welcome not just your questions, but your suggestions about how to get the most and make the most out of this series of lectures. Thank you.